My name is Ken Burgess. I'm a partner with Cone Resnick and work with this group of folks that you guys probably all know fairly well. And we represent TDEM, Texas Division of Emergency Management, and one of their contractors supporting the FEMA recovery efforts across the state. And we were lucky enough to get the opportunity to work with you guys in a part of the state that typically does not get hit like you guys have in the last couple of years. And so we wanted to take a little bit of time today to just kind of to walk through some things that we've been observing over time. We've really started to get into a groove where cash flow is an issue, and so we want to provide some support to you guys and making sure we can speed up the funds that are coming through for recovery, identify some best practices that we've seen along the way, and we'll probably have some of your stuff up here at some point. But also introduce you to the other state stakeholders who support this recovery mission. I'm sure you guys have learned by now it takes a village to do recovery, and you've probably seen 60 different people at some point in time, between FEMA project specialists, PAC leaders, the regional staff, TDEM staff, and then our folks out here. So, what we wanted to do today is just kind of take a little bit of time to pass some information on to you, so you can introduce about the status of anything. We want to be able to answer those. So, I appreciate everybody taking the time to come in today. I know some of you drove 2.5 hours or more, and we want to make this worth your while. I know working with these guys and our time with TDEM that everybody from the state that is in this room and everybody on our team genuinely cares about recovery in this area. We take a lot of pride in trying to make this as easy for you guys as possible. I know that sounds kind of ridiculous considering some of the stuff that you had to do to account for your costs, but what we want to do is just make this a seamless process for you guys. We want you to maximize the amount of funding you get. We want it to happen as quickly as you can, and we want you to be able to protect it, rebuild effectively. Let's move on past this. So I want to start with just allowing our TDEM counterparts to introduce themselves. I'll start with you, Mr. Cottle, and go around from there.
Good morning, I'm Steve Cottle. I'm the section administrator for the grants processing section at TDEM. Long title, short job. We basically deal with the money coming in from FEMA and making sure we distribute it out to all y'all to aid the community statewide.
Greg Gotch, I'm the district coordinator at Abilene. Working with you, y'all. Let's see if there's try to help with any issues that come up. If you're not getting what you think you should be, or if you're having to do things 2 or 3 times, something like that, let me know. I'm your local rep right here at Abilene. I work through these 19 counties and areas.
Kevin Gillen, Section Administrator of the Recovery and Mitigation Grant for the Central Texas, Panhandle, and West Texas, and Eastland County here.
My name is Andrea Lowe. I'm the Recovery Officer, and I'm working out of the Garland office.
Morning, I'm Todd McGinnis. I'm a Recovery Officer. I'm out of the Austin office, currently assigned to the Joint Field Office with FEMA. I'll be the liaison for this area, taking over from Kyle Jones. So I'll be your new POC for this area.
Thank you, guys. I think that's it. So, I wanted you to meet these guys because if for some reason you can't get what you need out of Roman, you got an opportunity to take it to the folks that are responsible for this long term. So we want to go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn it over to Roman in a second, but we want to move through this as quick as we can. There's some really good information we're going to cover. We want to respect your time and try to get out of here in a decent amount of time. So, Roman, you want to take it from here?
Great, thanks, Ken. And I don't want to put Ken on the spot here, but he's a little bit of a celebrity. He's currently ranked number 3 in the world in white-tailed deer, the video game. Buckeye. want to say also thank you so much for showing up. This turnout is great. It's more than I expected, but I think it goes to show that there's a lot more that we can do, and there's a lot more information that we need to pass along to everyone here. So thank you for driving out here. I know that for some of you it was quite a long drive, so appreciate that very much. And we're going to introduce here shortly some of our team members, but I just want to go over that. We have a quick presentation, and then after that we want to flip this over into a bit of an open house format. So we're going to be in the back. We've got a table set up for procurement, payment processing, and other general questions. So please stick around and ask us any questions you have. And I also think that this probably would be a really good networking opportunity for the different counties and local governments to talk amongst themselves about different issues that you're having and different observations that you've made. And please communicate those back to us, and as well as Tina, who's here with us today. So with that, we'll get started. So the first half of today's presentation, I'll be walking you through that. I'm going to talk about the goals for today. We're going to go over a high-level program overview because I think that that's important. It's been a while since our kickoff meetings and our applicant briefings, so I want to touch on some of those points. And then we're going to go over the regulatory landscape, so the rules that we all have to work within. And then Ken is going to jump back in, and he's going to talk a little bit about the basic accounting requirements. Then we'll break. When we come back from break, Jake Heatherly, who's in the back, is going to walk us through the payment request process, some of the best practices that we've observed now, having processed a handful of the large projects. And then any questions, and again, then we'll roll into our open house. So this is our team in Austin. You probably recognize some of these people, but most of them you probably don't. And so we have a support team, which is actually run by Alicia, so they're the ones who are helping us get organized. We also have a handful of our accountants in the background who you guys never really interact with face to face, but they're the ones who are processing your payments, putting together those document requests. And some of the people on the grants management side are here today, and those are your day-to-day contacts. So if you have received an email from one of them, so we have Kelsey, Kiera, Charlie, Alicia, and myself. If you've never seen us in person, we'd love to meet you and put a name to a face as well. And of course, we went over Kent Burgess, who's our direct boss, my boss, partner at Resnick, and Kent is a great mentor to all of us. He's been doing this since Katrina, so he's has a huge wealth of knowledge to share with us. So that's kind of our team. So this is our team in Austin. It's the ones that you do see and the ones that you don't see that often. Okay, let's jump into our workshop goals. So today, what I want to do, two things. I want to provide insights, and I want to answer your questions. And I know that not everyone in this room had an opportunity to go to an applicant briefing or to go to a kickoff meeting. And that's kind of true because that's where a lot of the critical information goes to you. And that's especially true for the people who are required to maintain the documentation, to put the timesheets together, as well as those of you who are required to then put together the payment request. So I hope what we're going to do today is we're going to gap some of that. We're going to fill in some of those knowledge gaps, and hopefully, ultimately, this is going to lead to easier, faster reimbursement requests for you. Okay, and with that, I guess let's jump into the public assistance program overview. So, the law that affords us the ability to have federal assistance is the Robert T. Stafford Act. And that allows federal assistance to provide both physical and financial support to local governments. So again, think of it this way, the Stafford Act allows for the system, and then FEMA, of course, is the federal agency that runs these grant programs. And the Stafford Act was signed back in 1988. So FEMA runs many grant programs, but the grant program that you are in is specifically the public assistance program. And the public assistance program covers 3 areas. So that is debris removal, emergency protective measures, and the repair of infrastructure. And under permanent restoration of infrastructure, that's where we get into our categories C through G. So C, obviously roads, D, water control facilities, E, public buildings, F, the utilities, and G, parks. So, along with your public assistance grants, under the PA program, we are also looking to reduce or eliminate future damages. So we refer to those cost-effective mitigation measures as 406 mitigation, and that's because Section 406 of the Stafford Act allows these types of projects to be funded. But in all of this, it's Texas that's responsible for assuring FEMA that it is going to comply with federal rules and regulations. And specifically, the Texas Division of Emergency Management, who's here in the room today, TDEM, is responsible for administering this program. So this is a very simple graphic here, but the main point that I want to get across today, and the purpose of this grant, this chart, is just to show that FEMA identifies, FEMA determines eligible damages. FEMA determines cost allowability. And then things shift over to the state's end, where the state has to assure compliance with federal rules and regulations, and the state is processing your grant funds to you. And you, the subrecipient, are responsible for completing the scope of work and documenting that work as we go along. So with that, I think, in order for you to comply, right, to maintain compliance, you have to understand the regulatory landscape that we're working with. So, federal laws, statutes, so this program is made up of statutes, executive orders, regulations, and policies. And its highest level are statutes, and those are laws. So, for instance, the Stafford Act, or the Clean Water Act. Yeah, so for instance, the reason why we come out and FEMA brings their environmental and historic preservation officers is for instance, again, the Clean Water Act that regulates like blue line streams. And then there's executive orders. So an example that you might know, is you've heard FEMA when they come out, they talk about, let's say, migratory birds, right? That would tie back to an executive order. And then regulations, we're going to go through regulations thoroughly here today, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that right now. But moving on to policy, a policy would be something like the decision between FEMA and TDEM when they determined that 4 inches of road base was an acceptable quantity. That's not in the regulations, but that's a policy that was crafted between FEMA, the region here, and TDEM. So what I need to stress today is that non-compliance, even unintentional non-compliance, can lead to some issues that we would have to deal with you. So the things that could happen if we don't comply with federal rules and regulations, FEMA and TDEM have the authority to then withhold cash payments, deny the use of funds, terminate the federal award, start debarment proceedings, and withhold future funds. So that is what we risk if we don't follow the rules and regulations. So when you accept a federal grant, when you accept your project worksheets, you are also stating that you are going to follow the rules and regulations. So in order for you to best secure those grant funds that you worked hard to get, you gotta get to know 2 CFR Part 200. All right, that's where the uniform administrative requirements come in, the cost principles, and audit requirements. So we're gonna cover a lot of that today.
And those are consistent for every federal pass-through grant to the municipality. So it's not unique to FEMA, but there's definitely something unique to FEMA.
So, and to that point, the uniform administrative requirements, those apply to the administration of all federal grants. So these are the rules and regulations these are the regulations that determine how grants are awarded, closed out, and audited. So for instance, 2 CFR 200.309 that talks about how after a period of performance ends, any costs that you incur after that are going to be disallowed, which is why our AROs hound you guys for time extensions, for instance. So the cost principles are a little bit different. These are the rules and regulations that determine how TDM, FEMA, and you yourselves are going to determine allowable, reasonable, and eligible costs. And do you want to touch on audit requirements a little bit now, or do you want to?
We can hold off for a second.
Okay. So I can't talk about payment processing without touching on procurement. Of course, procurement is one of the major topics here, and it's a presentation in and of itself. But we do need to touch on this for just a couple slides here. So when we talk about procurement, we're always asking you, how did you procure? What was your, give us your procurement policy, your purchase policy. Specifically, what we're talking about is obtaining goods and services. And goods, of course, are tangible items. So culverts, road base, but that also applies to when you're going out to hire a contractor. I know that a lot of us here have discussed the regulatory requirements for the Army Corps. Well, that's an involved process. If you want to go out and hire a consultant to come in and help you, there's a procurement process for that. And those would be, of course, services. So in this program, we really think of procurement in 5 different types of procurement. And they are micro purchase. And micro purchase are for supplies and services that are less than $3,500. And then we have small purchase. And a lot of what you show us really falls under small purchase. It's not perfect, but it's mostly what you're trying to accomplish are the small purchases. Think of small purchase as routine, commercial, fixed price purchase orders, right? That's what a small purchase is from our perspective. Then there's sealed bids. When you have a construction project, the appropriate method for obtaining that contractor for construction should be the sealed bid method. Competitive proposals, RFPs, and RFQs, that's the method that you use if you want to bring on architectural or engineering. And so how we're going to distinguish between sealed bids, let's say, and competitive proposals, RFPs, is sometimes you cannot award a contract based solely on price. There's other intangibles that you need to consider, and that's when you're going to look at an RFP or an RFQ. And then we have non-competitive proposals, which is, that's only allowable if that item that you need is only available from one source. So that's how we think of procurements.
Or in an exigent situation, but right now, the urgency of non-competitive proposal is really not present. So anything that would move forward would really need to be only one source available, but there are some.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. When you're in the moment when the disaster is fresh and you have an immediate threat to human health, life and safety, those are the instances where maybe a non-competitive proposal is appropriate for you. However, on the flip side, then it is also your responsibility to document that exigency, which is something that we would have to provide to FEMA, and that's a little bit subjective. So we want to play it safe, especially now where we're far removed from any flooding or any of those situations. This is what we need, how we need to train ourselves to think. But yeah, absolutely, non-competitive in the moment. Sometimes those are the most appropriate types.
And I'll just add that these different procurement methods were defined. Really, the micro purchase method was, and I'm glad the federal government decided to do this because in previous OMB circulars, they did not define micro purchase. Basically, anything under $150,000 was a small purchase, which required competitive quotes. You had to go out and get free quotes. So in the most recent regulations, they changed and defined a micro purchase, which is there's really nothing, besides having a purchase order invoice or anything. You don't have to demonstrate why you select their particular vendor for micro purchases. But for small purchases, anything greater than $3,500, there's supposed to be a little bit more A little bit more due diligence there. Seal bid, it's even more due diligence. And so each one of these has their own kind of rules and requirements that go with them. But yeah,
And I think what we see, when I'm receiving documentation, when I'm looking at your documentation, we see a lot of non-compliant, not purely, some issues with our small purchases, a lot of issues with our sealed bids. So we're going to talk about this a lot more later, but I really do want to just take the time briefly to say, when you're going to go procure materials, when you're going to go procure a contract, I would love it if you guys brought us into that mix before you went ahead and started that process. We want to make sure that when you have a grant, you're able to bring in all those grant dollars, and we're not jeopardizing those funds because you missed a step in the process. So, again, please include us in that conversation, and involve especially if you're at the county level and you have a county attorney, bring your attorney into the mix too. What we don't want to see is you go out and bring in a contract for $200,000, and $200,000 of those dollars get questioned down the road. So that's what we want to avoid. Okay, so in general, procurement rules exist to make sure that taxpayer dollars are not wasted or abused. So when you're using the correct procurement type and you're following the correct procurement methodology, you're helping to ensure that those taxpayer dollars, are paying a fair price. So, when we receive a payment request, we're required to test your procurements for compliance with federal regulations. So, for instance, we're looking at things like how did you purchase your raw materials? How did you bring on your contract labor? If you had engineers, how did you bring them into this? And there's a lot of guidance out there, which fortunately there is guidance out there. And so after this meeting, I'm going to send you guys this presentation. And so that link there is like the clearinghouse for a lot of FEMA guidance. So please go to this link and check out the resources there. But these are 5 of the resources that are available at that link there, and these are all super pertinent to what you're doing currently, which is getting this work done. And again, just one more time, if you are new to those concepts of those different types of procurements, the different contracting types, that's why we're here. So please bring us into that so we can help you through that process. When Jake and AJ and all of our compliance and payment request people are looking at your documentation, these are some of the things that we're looking for. Not all, but this is some of it. So we're looking at, again, what was the method you used for procurement? Was it the appropriate method? What was the contract type? Was it the appropriate contract type? And what factors were used to determine the winning bidder? And ultimately, was it a justifiable price? And so here to the right, we have some of the common findings of the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General, and what they've communicated down to us, through FEMA to us, is that they often find, again, non-competitive contracting practices, failure to include required contract provisions, failure to perform cost and price analyses, and cost plus percentage of construction cost contracts. So these are all things that are going to jeopardize the value of that contract. So to put it real simply, if you miss a daily timesheet, at worst you're missing that 8 hours a day for that one person. But if you fail to procure properly, essentially you are jeopardizing the entire value of that contract. Anything you want to add on?
besides, the OIG really likes to question contracts in their entirety, and sometimes for...
Sir, could you stand up and
Sure,
speak
sure.
this way, please?
In a lot of cases, the OIG will find what seems to be a mundane compliance requirement, like did you perform and document a cost or price analysis? Basically, before you went out and solicited services or purchased goods, did you have an idea of what the cost was going to be in advance, and did you analyze what that's going to be? The OIG will often question an entire contract for that particular compliance requirement. Fortunately, the OIG's recommendations in their audit reports do not have, they don't have the authority of enforcement, which falls to the FEMA region. So you can often plead your case to the region that we did do a cost or price analysis, we just didn't document it. We knew what we were getting into in advance. So, you know, there's ways to plead your case to get those to be
Let me touch
eligible.
on that, which is the reason why often we're doing those document requests. And that's why we're asking a lot of those questions, because we've seen something that we have to note as a finding in our compliance testing workflows. But what we're also trying to do is not just ding you and say, this is wrong, we are not gonna pay these costs. We're doing quite the opposite. We're saying, okay, we've noticed this. What can we possibly get from our applicant to help tell this story so that we can argue it successfully and get these funds paid?
And sometimes it might result in a delay in funding getting to you, but in the grand scheme of things, it's protecting your best interest because eventually all large project files have to go up to FEMA for review. And what we've learned is if we identify a minor issue in advance, work with you guys to get a really good understanding of what happened. I mean, this was a disaster. Never at any point was something going through your heads as your roads were all completely destroyed that, oh, did I do a cost price analysis when I called a friend that had a grader to come and fix it? No, that's not going to happen. So what we want to do is tell the story in a way that we're not going to avoid the issue, but we're going to present it in a way that where we've learned that FEMA will determine that's going to be reasonable.
We know common sense tells us that the work needs to be done. We have to repair, we have to recover. We know that those activities are going on. But what's really hard for us sometimes is to be able to tell that story in writing, in paper, so that down the road, if somebody looks at your project in particular, those questions are answered. And they don't have to say, well, the state paid it, but now we're gonna question all these costs. What we don't ever wanna happen is we pay funds, and those are questioned down the road after the money's hit your account. So, anything else on that? Okay. So, I put this table together because there are so many regulations, but I thought that these were some that were particularly relevant to your payment requests and your documentation efforts. So, on the column to the left, that's the topic of the regulation. Obviously, in the middle, the regulation itself. And then here on the far right column, you can click on that link and it'll take you to the statutory language. So this is just a point of reference for you. And again, after the presentation, I'll be sending these out to everybody who signed the assignment sheet. So if you didn't sign the assignment sheet, please do, and then I will make sure that you guys get a copy of this, all the other materials that we printed out today. And I've got more in the office, but I didn't want to be yelled at for burning up our printer again. And so we'll be emailing those to you. All right, and so, clearly, nobody can wrap their heads around all the minutia all at once. There's a lot going on. You guys know that. You've been there with us, and so, we're very fortunate that FEMA just recently published, in 2016 actually, they published this policy guide. And from personal experience, this is the best guidance that I've seen so far. It is super easy to read. It's organized in a way that even if you knew nothing about the program, you could flip open and find what you're looking for. So,
But previously, that document, which is about 300 pages, and easy to navigate, to find what it is you're looking for in particular, it was 50 separate documents in the 9500 series. It was impossible to really get to something straightforward as to the direction you need to go. But that guide is a game changer.
and this is something that's going to help. It's going to help auditors. It's going to help commissioners. It's going to help county judges because it talks about both on the policy side, but then it footnotes to the regulations. So instead of Charlie or myself telling you, hey, we need to do this, you can say, okay, well, why do I need to do that? And it'll take you straight to the regulations.
And it combines both the FEMA regulations, which are the 44 CFR that you mentioned earlier, and the OMB regulations at 2 CFR. It really brings them together in a very readable way that you can do a word search in there for something that you're looking for, and it'll take you right to exactly what you're looking for. So it's very helpful.
Yep. Okay, so just for perspective, right? TDM is currently managing over 8,000 open sections, right? So I mean, that's a ton. And out of those, about 4,000 or half of those are for open projects between the 4223 disaster and 4272, which is the latest disaster. So you can imagine TDM needs to have and does have a robust compliance monitoring and accounting system.
I'll add to that. I mean, Steve can tell you firsthand that TDM is one of the most regulated agencies I've ever seen. They undergo, they've got a DPS internal audit division, the state auditor, the OIG audits, IPIRA, the improper payment, there's improper payments audits. And so over the years, they've been dinged with every type of finding you can possibly imagine, and which gets published. And you know, so they've had to really pay attention to, all right, what are we doing to make sure we avoid these types of things? And it doesn't, and I know in some cases it's going to seem like it's a little bit over the top and provided, but it's a result of so many different oversight agencies coming in and just constantly dinging them over the head with findings that, all right, the framework that they've got in place now is one that all of these agencies have agreed to as this is appropriate for internal control, this is great funds management, this is the way we want it done. So there's a lot more in this than someone that doesn't have to do the work on the ground, like, you know, actually do the work. They're not, people aren't up there saying, well, this is how we want to do it, when they have no idea what the burden is to the locals. There's a lot more that's gone into some of these decisions. So
and that burden is every day growing. I mean, you are still having grants written right now. I mean, Comanche County, West Richard, yeah. You've got about 100 projects there that are, you know, somewhere coming down the pike. And
I have 50 roads having.
exactly. So, yeah. And that's, you know, part of this challenge that we're doing with daily. You know, we have some of you who have your grants written. Some of them are complete. We paid you out 100%. Others, we're still working our way through. For instance, you're at County, we're working through the environmental process on a couple of your projects. Manche still having projects written today. Some of you might even still have to be doing site inspections. We have grants, sub-grants at all levels. Some of them we're trying to do the final compliance monitoring to give you that final payment. Others are, you know, we're waiting to receive a payment request from you. So every day we have all levels. But again, just for perspective, 8,000 open grants and growing, and 4,000 and growing of those are for, you know, these past 2 years. So there's a lot going on. So my point is, as a part of TDM's compliance monitoring system, these are some of the activities that happen on a day-to-day basis. And this is what we're doing, this is what the state's doing. So, you know, we're doing ongoing risk assessments, which we do when we're setting up a bank. So at the time when we're asking you for your direct deposit and your DAA form and all that information, we're doing a risk assessment so that we can plan for how we're going to test, you know, your projects going forward. On a daily basis, we're monitoring progress and completion, which is why we'll call you guys up and just ask how things are going. And you guys also are informing us of different issues that are popping up on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes we'll go down and we'll sample some of your documentation. We'll do a desk review. We'll do desk monitoring, that's what we call it, which is where we're just looking at some of your documentation, especially for small projects, because, you know, of course here we're talking about large projects, large project payments, but you also have small projects. And we, of course, sample those during a site inspection, but we also sometimes pull those projects so that we can audit those pretty much as well. And several of you I've gone on, had the pleasure of going with you to do site visits or site inspections. So that's one of the last steps in our program delivery monitoring. So I don't necessarily do this, but Jay, AJ, two of our guys in the back, and our back of house people too, are doing our compliance and accounting reviews as well. So they're the guys who are processing your payments, tracking payments, they're reviewing all your documentation and proof of payment. And do you want to talk a little bit now about single audit?
I'll dig in a little bit more.
All right, great. So anyways, that's kind of the ongoing work that we're doing on our end while you guys are completing the work and submitting that documentation over to us. And I think I'm going to jump into your slides now. So you want to touch on?
So this, how does this thing work? So this is not, for those of you who really don't care about accounting, you can take a look at that. But this, one of the things wouldn't be remiss to do is to not let some of you guys know what some of the other implications of these awards are going to be. Because I know there are some city finance folks, there's some county auditors here, and there's some folks that are inevitably responsible for the financial situation of your organization and for the audits that are going to have to occur annually. And so what I want to touch on is a few things that are a little bit more on the accounting side, but kind of explain a little bit of the framework that is required by FEMA, give you some ideas on how to set your books up to where you can track things appropriately and know that you're going to meet all the regulatory requirements. And it'll make things easier when you're requesting reimbursement or you're going to close out a project. All these things are kind of coming together. And then there's a few things that are just can be a real pain, like single audit. And for some of you, and we'll talk about a little bit more in a second, there's some of you may have never participated or had been subject to a single audit, which is a requirement for subrecipients to receive a certain amount of federal awards. So we want to talk through a little bit of that as well. I think one of the real absolute bare bones basics of federal grants accounting, and it's something that has been implied in the way we've asked for document requests and the way we've worked with you guys, is that FEMA does require, and the OB requires, that recipients and subrecipients maintain a system that can account for their projects on a project-by-project basis. So that's the funding for the project, the expenditures for the project, whatever obligations and encumbrances you have for contracts and budgets, all those things have to be done on a project-by-project basis. Now, these regs seem to be written for major cities and state agencies because they are pretty elaborate. And we know that not all cities and towns and counties are going to have robust accounting systems in place, or going to have accountants working on things, or auditors. So we understand that, but that, what we want to do is talk through some situations where you may not have that infrastructure, but here's some things that you can do to meet these requirements as well as you possibly can in the process. So one of the things that, and this is all accounting. So are there any finance, accounting, audit folks here in the room? Excellent, excellent. So this all makes sense to you guys. So basically, for each project that is written, you need to have, to some extent, a ledger for that project. Whether or not it's a paper ledger, if it's it doesn't have to be in Quicken or something, any kind of accounting system. There just needs to be, on a project-by-project basis, an accounting for the funds that are awarded to it, whatever other funds are going to go contribute to the completion of the project. A lot of the projects that you guys have had written were not insured. But for those that were, when you set up your ledger or your journal for a particular project, you'll want to start with, here's what the total estimated cost of the project was. Here's how much in insurance proceeds we have received. Here's how much in federal funding we're anticipating receiving. Here's how much in local funds we have to contribute to meet the match. And then as you receive those funds and as you incur costs, operate that like a general ledger for that particular project. And it will make life so much easier for you down the road when you do get audited, because we're going to talk about it in a second. A lot of you in this room are going to be subject to a single audit. And so this is going to really prepare you for what's going to come there. And it's going to prepare you for submitting documentation to our team, making those reimbursement requests fly by quickly. And so we'll dive into that a little bit more later. But basically, you need to be able to track things fairly well on a project-by-project basis. Now, I know this is a challenge for those who did not have much of a say in how your projects were written, especially you guys who have 70 roads written into a single project, and a lot of those roads started long before FEMA road repairs started I don't know what to tell you there. Do the best you can. I think so far what we've been able to What FEMA gathers as they write the project as here's the work completed to date. What we do is use that to start a ledger on our side, and then we just collect things as that moves on. I would encourage you to do the same thing.
Or say, for Eastland County, I think with Ryan in particular, this is a situation that you find yourself in where it took so long for those projects to be written. You had done the bulk of the work, incurred hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of eligible costs. So to Ken's point, we both found ourselves in a situation where you didn't have all the records that we had to do a compliance review with. So sometimes we have to work backwards where we'll tell you what you don't have and go from there.
Exactly. And one of the things that is required in these regs is as you incur costs, that you've got to refer to the appropriate supporting documentation, because that's what an auditor is going to do when they come in and they perform a single audit. They're going to do project-specific testing of your expenditures, and single audits are not limited to just large. So I do want to give you a little bit of a notice that there is a real value in having small projects written, because you get the funding immediately, and FEMA does not require the supporting documentation to document actual costs. On the flip side of that, it does not change the regulatory requirements under the OB circulars to maintain, track your project costs by project. So there's a chance that if you said, oh, we got that, we're good to go, that if you do have to undergo a single audit, that could backfire on you a little bit. Audit findings, we'll talk a little bit more about what TDM's role is in that as well, but they can cause you more trouble than they're worth. So we're not going to go into these much more. The links that Roman is going to send out with this kind of cover these, but there are also requirements for performance management. If you've got contractors in place, you got to have standards for it really hold them to whatever standards that you've requested for the services. Record retention is a big key requirement. Essentially, the record retention requirements are after your particular award is closed completely. You closed your final project, everything's done. We've taken you through the closeout process. 3 years after that, you have to retain them, and TDM has to retain them 3 years. Their copies of your costs and documentation 3 years after the close of the entire disaster.
Do not get rid of them.
But
At
that's
the 07 disaster, we finished we finished in March. We finished the audit for the 07 disaster. And everything had been done. We were one of the last ones to get through. And if we had thrown everything away once closeout was done, we wouldn't have had to go pull everything.
Our first kickoff meeting for 4223 was I'm not gonna say what the county was, but basically we sat, Roman and I sat with their county commissioners while they voted about whether or not they wanted to pursue FEMA funding at all, because of how much of a headache it was from things that you're talking about in the past. And I know for a fact that TM has the way their systems are set up, the requirements they impose on their contractors, their expectations are that everything that comes in once. It's stored centrally, it's backed up daily, and that those records are there permanently. We can't say the same thing for FEMA all the time. We still run across folks that'll pick up your original documents, tell you they'll be back with them in a few days, and then they disappear for good. But those are few and far between, and I know that the FEMA leadership in this region has done everything they can to make sure that their folks are applying the same standards as the state staff as well. And we share those things. We share those documents. They've got access to the state system, so hopefully that won't be a case moving forward, but you make a great point, for sure. We won't get into it too much more. You can read all you want about cash management requirements, period performance. If you do construction contracting, there are bonding requirements for anything over $100,000. But what I want to get into, I know this is something important for TDM, because I think in this room, at least 7 maybe 8 applicants have well over $1 million in projects written and federal funds obligated, and there's still more stacking up on top of that. So basically, the single audit is a requirement for any federal funds expended in a fiscal year. Basically, if you exceed $750,000 in that fiscal year, you're subject to a single audit. What expended means is basically, and for disaster recovery, it's trickier than any other federal award. Who here has been a part of a single audit before? They're elaborate, and the oversight agencies all have requirements as to how they follow up on those things. We'll talk about what FEMA's role is, but they take your annual financial statements audit and kick it into a completely different gear, and testing federal expenditures can be a real pain, because those guys are really auditing. They're going to look at all of the things where we're working with FEMA to determine what's reasonable, what's not. That for them is black and white, and so when they have findings there, it's stuff that's got to be followed up on. But
Question.
Sure.
Is that single audit on a single project or total funds expended?
It's total funds, so it's
On all
basically your
projects?
annual financial statements audit, in addition to a review of your federal expenditures and how you kept track of basically your internal controls, your cash management, your documentation, meeting all the requirements. And there's a compliance supplement for the single audit that is, I think, 3,000 pages. And it dives into every single federal program, which is identified by. Oh, yeah. Any federal grant would be subject to that review, but and it's the combination of all your federal funding received. If that exceeds $750,000, you got 500 in FEMA funds, 250 in HUD. For that, if you expended that in a year, you still meet the requirements for single audit.
So for some of these people that have both their CDBG dollars and their.
Right. So what I want to clarify for you guys is what qualifies as expended. So this has always been a point of contention in disaster programs, because in a lot of cases, you receive funding a year after you've spent, right? So you spent money to fix a road, you don't receive it until after it's obligated, and then the funds are passed through from the state. You can count funds expended as soon as you know those funds are going to be included in the federal award. So it's actually when you spend the money as what counts. If at the end of that fiscal year, when you're accounting for all the federal funds expended, you've got a project that's been awarded that corresponds to those costs, then those have to go on your basically your schedule of expenditures for federal awards. That's the C for the FEMA.
What if you don't have a PW yet?
If you don't have a PW yet, we can talk offline. There's a variety of different approaches that it is not completely clear in the 2 CFR regs, but there's some accepted practices that we've seen over time. So that's what qualifies as expended. If that amounts over $750,000 in federal funds, you're subject to a single audit. So basically, the single audit after the end of your fiscal year, what's required is for you to get an independent auditor. It's going to come in and do your financial statements audit, and then they're going to also perform the single audit components, which accounting firms that do that type of work know exactly what needs to go into that testing, what has to be in those reports. And essentially, you have 9 months from the end of your fiscal year for that report to be complete and submitted to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, which is basically a 9-month requirement for you to submit all that information up. You don't submit the entire report up. It's a summary of the report that goes to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. And then that report also has to be provided to the key oversight agencies that at the state level that are responsible for the pass-through of funds, TDM being a case in point here. So basically, you've got 9 months from after the end of the fiscal year to have this report together. If you get it done prior, As soon as the audit report is done, you have 30 days from that to submit to the state. These are all part of the 2 CFR regs. But basically, you've got 30 days from there to make sure it's in the audit clearinghouse, and for every state that's required you to submit that report, it's submitted to that state. Correct.
Your CDBG funds included that.
They are.
Value as well.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit, the CDBG funding and some other leverage funding a little bit later as well. So basically, that report's got to be submitted. The state TDM has your fiscal year end date, so at that 9-month mark, a little bit before that, they're going to send you some notices saying, hey, you're single, we need either a certification from you that you do not have in excess of $750,000 in federal expenditures, or we need your audit report within this amount of time. If you don't submit that, we know firsthand that will result in, as soon as that 9 months hits, your account will be shut down for any funding that's going to come through until you're able to resolve that and get that report submitted. So what the state's going to do once they get the report is look and see if there are any findings in there that, one, are specific to the FEMA award, or two, are general accounting practices covered under the 2 CFR requirements that are where non-compliance would be an issue with any kind of award. And they're going to follow up and make sure that there's a corrective action plan in place to address the finding, and that corrective action plan has been provided to the state, and that you can demonstrate that you are actually implementing that corrective action plan in a timely manner. Then once that's done, the state will issue what's called a management decision. All this is covered under the 2 CFR regs, a management decision as to the acceptability of your corrective action plan, some guidance and recommendations as to how to better comply in the future, things along those lines. But you can pretty much be sure that some folks in this room are going to go through this process. If you need any kind of guidance on that, we know of an accounting firm around that might know a little bit about single audits. So just let us know, and we'll point you in the right direction as to how you can go about and comply with that. So I think that's it for single audit. And I think it's time, now that the accounting stuff's all done, you guys are all sleepy. 12:15? What's that? Okay, let's just take 20 minutes. We'll come back at 12:15 and we'll get started on the really practical stuff that Jake and Roman are going to client specialists and accountants that are kind of working behind the scenes. Obviously, you guys get to see you see Roman and some of our other recovery staff that are out working with you day to day, and they get to do all the talking. Jake gets to do all the work, and so he specifically has been kind of leading a team of 3 or 4 folks that are focused on this particular region. So he's seen the different payment requests that are coming through. Maybe I think we've processed somewhere around 60 from this particular region just for large projects. So he's going to walk through some of the things he's seen, some recommendations to everybody. And if you got questions, we're going to at the end of this, we're going to have some breakouts. Anybody that, if you want to follow up on a project status, a payment request, if you got general questions, we want to offer you an opportunity to do that. But for now, Jake, you got it.
So today I'm going to go over kind of what I do when I receive all of your documentation and how I look at everything and try to decipher all the tons of documents that I receive. So starting off, broken this up into 2 separate parts. Tracking costs, everything labor, materials, equipment, contractor, and direct administrative costs, and then the backup that supports all that documentation. So before I get into that, I'd like to show off this timeline, which is actually one of your grants in here. And I would like to stress 2 main points from the actual date the disaster happened to the grant award. So as we can see, there's like 6 or 7 months between the actual disaster and the grant award where work has probably already started and you didn't actually know exactly what is going to be disaster related, what's not going to be disaster related.
Which project?
Yeah, and so I'd like to really stress that tracking documents from the beginning is key. And not only helps FEMA when they're writing the project worksheets, but if we can start with that documentation, FEMA gets it, write their kind of project worksheets, and then that's what comes to me, it's all the same, and then that's what can really start to speed up this process.
So you're not gonna know a project number for months, and what roads are gonna be included in what project. The best way to start is, and a lot of you have already done this, is our region and county road. You can keep track of things like that, so once FEMA gets ready to pull all that into a single project, you'll be able to piecemeal that in, and it'll be easy for us to take that and reimburse those.
Yeah, so this is a little rehash of that, but essentially just tracking costs means to record all your direct costs that are incurred on your current or future public assistance projects. And it makes it sound a lot easier than it is. I definitely understand the struggle. But once again, absolutely work should start before grants are awarded, and tracking costs should also start before grants are ever awarded.
So the work, I do want to make one clarification that I know FEMA would want, and work will almost in all situations start prior to an award, unless it is an alternate or improved project or a hazard mitigation proposal. In those cases, there are other requirements that have to happen before construction starts. You're probably made aware of that, and in those cases, you guys are really trying to fix roads and get debris moved. So that's probably not going to be the case that often, but I did want to get that clarification.
Yeah, so starting into the tracking methods, how you can start reporting all your costs as they happen. The big two are going to be timesheets and invoices, which is obvious, but I like to stress like detailed timesheets and invoices, like go the extra mile. As we've already talked about, marking down, hey, was this FEMA related? What road was the work done on this day? All of that kind of information is vital. And then all of that information can be rolled up into the material summary records that can then be handed out to FEMA, TDOM, ourselves, so that we all have the same information and are all on the same page. And the purpose and benefits, talked about that a little bit, but provide to FEMA for their accurate project worksheets is going to expedite my process, because when I get your summary, I'm going to be able to look at FEMA's project worksheet, see the scope of work, and just go down the line and see what they wrote, what you gave me, and just be able to verify all that. That's also going to cut down on all the wonderful document requests that you get from us, and hopefully it'll maximize your reimbursable costs. So now I'm actually going to show you some examples for each cost type, that some of the big cost types that you see, materials, labor, equipment, and contract costs. Starting off with just a simple invoice for materials. The red, which hopefully you guys can all see, it represents something that you'd actually write on there, like supplemental information for me. So you have a standard invoice for a bunch of different crushed road base, riprap, whatever it is, showing everything that you purchased. Then, just looking at this, I can see that you purchased a bunch of material, but I don't know where the material necessarily went. So whether you know the county road specifically it went to, or if you know the specific project worksheet that it belongs to, if you could just write down along those lines exactly where it went, that's going to help me track the costs, which is one of the big time consumers for us. Because if we don't have similar documentation to what FEMA had, and we're trying to run around and track all where everything went, that's where we kind of spin our wheels, and then we need to talk to you guys, and it becomes a big mess.
And we know that in most cases, you guys, your materials are stored somewhere. You dump 100 tons, you pick up 20, you take it out. So not always is it going to be nice and perfect, but to the best of your ability, being able to track to know what quantity of materials are going to what site is really going to help things out. I mean, there are ways around that if it comes down to it, but it makes things a lot quicker and a lot smoother if you're able to track those out of project site.
Yes, Judy?
I just have a hint. When we get our invoices, we put a blank sheet of paper and on the top, and the total amount of material we have. And then for each PW or road that comes off of that invoice, we subtract that amount and wrap the county road and the date that it was used until we get down to a zero, because a lot of our invoices are $30,000 to $50,000. And so it's going on multiple projects.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's the way we keep track, and so we know that I don't send you an invoice that doesn't have material left.
She's going for star student.
Yeah.
And I'm just,
Absolutely. Like, that's
we
exactly
learned.
the kind of stuff that I'm looking for. It's super helpful for me. And so once you've actually had all your invoices, it's also very helpful to compile them all into a material summary sheet. And so here you can see this is actually the breakdown of the previous invoice, and it has all the major information on it: vendor, unit price, total price, purchased, and quantity. And this is super helpful for us because just tracking everything back to the total material claimed amount. We don't have to go back and look at every single invoice, try to add them all up, get the total, make sure that matches the project worksheet. We could pull up the material summary and go, oh, hey, there's $4,000 on here. There's invoice 1, 2, 3, 4. We can easily track it back.
Especially when there are 10 roads being worked on in a single reimbursement request, then it gets to be a real, that's when you can count on the document request being pretty extensive if this kind of information is provided.
And additionally, maybe these costs, like we talked about, are pre-award, so we actually aren't positive on which costs are going to be going on in the project worksheet. So maybe the riprap on County Road 2, it was determined actually isn't going to be under a federal grant. Super easy to just cross that straight out, come up with your new total, and it'll be easy for us to follow. So next, I'm going to touch on the same thing, but for the labor costs and timesheets. I know timesheets are a pain, but I stress everybody to get everybody to fill them out every day if possible. Definitely by the end of the week, I recommend. And basically do the same thing of just noting down roads, whether it's FEMA related, project worksheet number, any of that information.
We're going to talk about some best practices here in a little while. We'd really like to hear some from you guys. I know Comanches County's got some thoughts on ways to track that kind of stuff. I know several of you guys have done a really good job with it, so we'd love to hear your input on this as well. And how you get county commissioners to actually fill out time sheets. That's a...
Hey, that takes personal.
And so kind of the same form here, just taking all those timesheets and then inputting them into a summary record for us, which breaks out as many days as you can on the summary. It helps us when we're inputting our information into our workbooks, because if we have some sort of form that shows like a daily work and daily timesheets, then we have to look through 30 documents to fill in our workbook, whereas if we have something like this, we can just look at one document. It's a lot quicker for us. So if you have a way to create a summary like this, it's definitely going to speed up the process on our end. Then additionally, some important information to include on the labor summary are going to be the hourly rate, a separate benefit rate, and then the total hourly rate altogether. So you can see that on there.
And I'll add a little bit to this. So the one of our requirements working under TM is that we do identify a full population of costs and a sample selection of a small percentage of those, just to make sure that there is accurate supporting documentation there. When you really break it out like this and you've got great detail by day, essentially what could happen is we can choose that particular person. Maybe you've got 15 folks that worked on this project during this period. We'll choose 1 or 2 and then go look and make sure that if there's supporting documentation but having it like this, it's easy for us to choose that sample, and then we know exactly what documents we're looking for when we're adopting them.
And so I'm just going to kind of run through this real quick. It's the same thing for equipment. Currently, we don't. I'd recommend including equipment on the timesheets as well as you can. I know a lot of the time as road hands and other road work's being done, almost always there's equipment to go right along with them. So if you could just go ahead and write down the equipment that was being utilized on the same sheet, that would go a long way. And we'll actually have a resource in the back for you guys to look at that is going to basically show a similar bi-weekly timesheet like this, but will include the equipment information on it. so it can all be reported together. And very similar summary to what we've seen before. On this summary, the main points that I'd like to point out are just the equipment cost code, the actual rate, and
So that's what we do is when we're reviewing those, we'll take a small sample of those equipment costs and make sure those correspond to time sheet records for that particular employee, and that the equipment used was specified in the project worksheet. And so there is a little bit of that it's a little bit menial and mundane, but it really does give us a good sense of confidence as to this entire reimbursement request is in good shape if those small samples are in documentation.
And that's another good point for using that sheet better with the employees and the equipment on it. It's just gonna make it a lot harder to make mistakes. So now here we're looking at contract cost invoice. It's going to be very similar to material in terms of tracking the costs. These become a little bit more complex to actually support, which we'll go into in a little bit. But main things I'm looking for here are just going to be invoice number, invoice date, and the total amount when I'm tracking it. And then a full contract summary, which breaks up all the different invoices you received. And then one thing I'd like to point out on this summary in particular is the invoice amount column and the claim amount column. These are not the same. So there's, just like county roads, there's potential for maybe it's not some invoice determines that's not the scope of work. So we like to keep both these columns, invoice amount for recognition purposes, but the claimed amount for us to actually see how much you're requesting. It sounds pretty simple, but this is where we can get very confused if there's not clear representation of what's being claimed and what's not.
I mentioned earlier that the 2 CFR regs require contract administration and performance policy for you to have. One of the easiest ways for you to make sure your contractor is performing well is when you're reviewing those invoices, make sure that the rates are consistent with what was agreed to in the contract. We're going to go through and do those kind of things just to make sure that there's nothing that's happening that's outside of what was approved to be done. So if you're able to do that in advance, I mean, even putting a memo that, you know, as part of your sign off to pay the invoice, that you've reviewed those things and compared to the contract, those are the kind of things that give us more and more confidence that, okay, they're reviewing this as well. So we really helps us out with our review process.
And so then you say, after you have all these different summaries, they can all be combined into one master summary, which we just call the cost summary sheet, which is then going to give you the exact total from all the different cost types that can go right directly on to the actual payment request. And so for there, it's super easy for me to track the costs. Like, okay, the payment request matches the master summary. Now I can start breaking out and looking at all these individual cost types, and it all makes sense to me going backwards. Because that's how I'm pretty much looking at all of this is backwards. One more thing I would like to talk about is that the amount expended on the payment request, please go ahead and put the actual amount that costs to do all the disaster-related work, even if it exceeds the PW amount. I can't guarantee that there's going to be necessarily anything beneficial to you that comes from telling us that, but in terms of me tracking costs, seeing all the different invoices, a lot of times I'll see excess cost, and then I get confused, I'm not necessarily sure, wait, is this all being claimed, is it not? So if you go ahead and show all the costs that were spent on the project, it's going to allow me to track it.
And that'll trigger, once that review is done, if the total amount does exceed the project worksheet amount, that'll get kicked over to Roman's team to correspond with you about requesting cost overrun from FEMA to actually reimburse those.
Yeah. So that was tracking costs, and now I'd like to talk about actually going in and supporting all of those costs. And so supporting documentation essentially just means to support your project costs. And there's three words that come directly out of 2 CFR that define exactly what supporting cost documentation should be. Allowable, which is just making sure that it's necessary and reasonable for the performance of the report. Reasonable, which essentially is just saying that a prudent person, somebody that's careful with money, would agree that this is a reasonable way to spend all of these funds. And then allocable, to make sure that it's actually directly assignable back to the project worksheet and the scope of work. And so when we look at supporting costs, these are the kind of documents that we're going to be looking for. Policies, procurement information, invoices, purchase orders, any sort of activity logs explaining the situations, payroll documentation, and proof of payment. And all this support is going to lead to more accurate project worksheets, faster reimbursement time for my team, and hopefully once get fewer document requests. So again, we kind of went over some examples. Procurement is a big one that I'm not going to go in depth here, but if you have any questions on procurement, I would highly recommend coming to the back after the presentation and talking to us about it. I know it was also stressed earlier, but it's super important to get procurement correct. So now I'm going to actually go into showing you supporting costs for each cost type. And I'm going to start off with materials. For materials, we're looking for 3 things. We're looking for proof of payment, any procurement information, and then the purchasing or procurement policy, and the purchasing policy, sorry. Proof of payment usually will come from, for most people, 2 main forms, either from the bank statement or a canceled check. For certain state,
Is Tarleton University here? No?
Yeah, we'll go and skip over that for now. Yeah, the payment vouchers is a little bit of a different system that's set up for states because of how their systems are set up. Procurement documentation, we talked about it earlier. We definitely would like to see 3 quotes from vendors at least whenever you're purchasing materials.
We know historically that's not been the case, and a lot of times there's only 1 or 2 local materials providers. I know Roman's got some suggestions on that. We are able to take in some cases, if you're able to clearly explain that within an hour's distance, we only have two people that can provide this. They've given us the exact same cost, so we just alternate the use of them based on which is closest to which precinct. Those kind of things are helpful, and that will lead us towards qualifying it as a non-competitive proposal because there were limited sources available, but ideally.
The issue there is that in the regulations, it says that we should look for, the policy says we should look for at least 3 sources there. I know a lot of you are in that situation where there are not 3 sources that are feasible. And I understand that because you told me that, we know that because we live it, but what we have to do is not document that for the person down the road who doesn't know you, doesn't know the situation.
And it's sometimes worth your while just to call somebody that you know is not going to provide it, just to not say no.
Yeah, and if you're running through these and you see something that I put on here that isn't being met, I would always recommend just include in your document package just a memo explaining the situation. Give us a call, talk to us about it. That goes a long way because then in my compliance review, I can note down just what they were talking about. Hey, there were only 2 material vendors willing to give prices to this applicant. So we can write that and it should become reasonable. And so looking at actual proof of payment, just a quick example, canceled check, front and back with the co-investment bank, just the stamp basically saying that it's been run through the bank. That's exactly what we're looking for, is either a canceled check, or we can do the same thing with a bank statement. Just highlight, red box, I mean, you don't even have to do that, we'll find it, but just the check number and it shows the amount going through. Now, supporting labor costs. This is a big one that we've had trouble with in the past, and I think it's just very hard to write on paper what we're really looking for. So I'm hoping that this gives everybody a good idea of the supporting documentation we're looking for to substantiate labor, and hopefully it makes sense to you why we're actually asking for it. So we're going to start off looking back at the labor summary record, and we're going to basically run through the whole process with Joe, the road hand. So I start from the summary sheet. And I'm going to go back, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the bank statement. here we can clearly see the lump sum of the payroll amount, showing almost $50,000. Obviously, Joe didn't get paid $50,000, so you ask, why is that helpful to me? And that's helpful because if we can get a payroll register, a check register, it's going to show all the amounts from the employees, and that total is going to actually tie me right back to the bank statement. And then I can go and find Joe, and not only Joe, I should be able to find hopefully everybody, so we don't have to, instead of having to get checks for 20 people, you can just provide me with these 2 documents, and I can track everybody back to that pay period. And so that's what I'm talking about when I ask for bank statements and a payroll register or check register. This is the kind of information. We're also going to ask for a previous extra pay stub. And the reason for that is because it's going to show us the fringe and some of the background information that employees are getting. So retirement information, healthcare information, and then we're going to see the net paid on the previous extra pay stub, which then we can actually go back again, and I can look at the current pay period that work was actually being performed on, and I can see these amounts match up perfectly, so I know that, okay, they're getting paid, they're not ballooning any salaries or any benefits because they're on federal grant.
That's exactly,
Yeah.
there are, in 2 CFR, there are requirements that it's documented that a person is not being paid more than they were prior, simply because there's a federal award that's reimbursing them. You guys wouldn't do that, I know, but it is something that we do check on a sample basis, and every time there is an increase, there's always a reason as to why. You know, they had an annual salary increase between then and now, so we only do that on a very small basis, but.
And like it said, like these amounts don't have to match perfectly. Obviously, people are getting small raises, annual raises throughout the year. And we might ask you about it, but the main thing we're checking for is something that's exorbitant, like that strikes out immediately. Like, hey, this person was getting paid $500 per pay period more than they were before. What happened? Okay, so now I'd actually like to go a little bit more in depth on the fringe benefits, where things get a little complex. So this is a fringe benefit sheet for an individual employee, and it actually shows all the benefits broken out as a part of their annual wages, and then all the percentages. So I'm going to actually take a look at most of those percentages, compare them to some worksheets we have that show like what's generally reasonable, and then I'm once again going to take the total benefit percentage here, which is the red amount at the bottom, about 63%. And I'm just going to go back and check, is that what they put on their summary sheet to make sure that, hey, what's adding up here when I'm actually checking is what they're claiming. And here it does. It's a little bit off, but once again, fringe benefits can be complex, rounding errors, stuff like that, we understand. So this is what an individual sheet looks like. This can be pretty hard to put together. So there is another method, and it's actually basically benefits by a group. And so we see these a lot, and these are really helpful and hopefully easier for you all. But there's one thing that I'd like to point out about them, and that is that if you're going to do it by group, we need to make sure that all the employees in their payroll, like in the entire payroll amount that everything's being calculated from, are getting similar benefits. Otherwise, we're going to have some skewing. Say you have some high-level employees that have extra benefits that other employees aren't able to get. Then we can't use this sheet because that total at the bottom is going to be inflated to higher than what it should. And so
it's even more pronounced when you have personnel where you're claiming a fringe benefit rate and they don't get any health care or pension or anything. You know, maybe they're working on just strictly an hourly basis. That's when you see those deviations. But as long as in general, there's a good sense of confidence that there are comparable benefits across the board, then it's actually ideal to use the agency-wide rate. It saves a lot of hassle in trying to dig down at the individual level.
And then one thing that's not on here that I'd like to touch on a little bit, as well as most of this information, we're going to go straight back to your payroll policy and your personnel policy and just compare them to make sure that everything is aligning and making sense. So now I'd like to quickly touch on supporting equipment costs. So luckily equipment costs are pretty easy for the most part, as long as you have the timesheets and the summary. Then mostly what we're looking for is just for ownership documentation to make sure that you actually own the documents, and then obviously when the site inspection is done, we'll make sure the work is actually performed. But that's about all we need. And so one of the documents we ask for the most is going to be an insurance listing. Hopefully that's helpful because it should have all of your equipment, so you don't need to go searching around for 50 titles of all the equipment that was used on the project, and it can all just be given to us quickly in this one listing. And last, I'm going to talk a little bit about supporting the contract costs. So once again, contract costs are very similar to materials. The main difference are going to be the actual contract that we have, and then the procurement information. Because this is where if you have a large contract, maybe you're paving a road or have something over $150,000, the procurement documentation requirement is pretty high. So here we're going to go back to Facility Repair Corp, and I'm going to essentially just review. You can see here we have by line item all the different costs that are being incurred on this contract. And I'm actually going to go back and read the contract to see if I can find the rates that were proposed on the contract and start matching those rates up to make sure that all the costs that were on the approved contract we're also seeing in the invoice.
So once again, this doesn't happen on every single invoice. We take a small sample to test for these, so it's not happening across the board. But as long as we're able to get reasonable confidence through a very small sample, then we usually treat it as good.
And then once again, we're looking at the same style of proof of payment, cancel checks and bank statements, the exact same as the materials work for. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about submitting your payment request and maybe submitting a first payment request. I know for a lot of you we've already had them, and so we've already gone through this, but it's good information to rehash a little bit. So once again, the cost summary sheet, I would recommend right under the payment request page on whatever you submit as a document package, put this as the next page, because it's going to help me immediately recognize what I'm looking at, what kind of costs are on the project, and just kind of get my mind prepared for what I'm about to dive into. Once again, here's the payment request form. These two, the amount expended and the amount on the cost summary sheet should match up. And now submitting your first RFR, there's going to be a few extra documents that we ask for. A lot of these are going to be policies, so equipment listings, which is what we mean by insurance documents, payroll policy, purchasing policy, and the pre-disaster preparedness steps. Hopefully, once you've given us all of these documents, we won't need to ask for them again, at least for this specific project. And then, lastly, if you are submitting an RFR, whether it's your first one or not, and you think there might be something confusing about what you're giving us, please let one of the recovery officers, Roman, Charlie, Alicia, any of them know, and set up a call with us, and you can let us know on the front end, like, hey, some of these costs might not be very clear, let me break it down for you. Anything that you might think is confusing for us is definitely going to help speed up any funding that you're going to receive.
Otherwise, we'll set up a call with you that.
Okay, and real quick, I'll talk about basically what it looks like when the RFR comes in to our process. So we have
request for reimbursement. We speak in acronym.
So grant is awarded, you receive the RFR reimbursement, and basically create your document package and send it to us. We're immediately going to take that package you put together and rip it apart, and essentially put it into all of our different workbooks, review all the tracked amounts, and then review all the supporting documentation that goes along with it. So any missing issues that we have, missing items or issues that we have, we're immediately going to create a document request and basically give you guys a call, send it over to you, wait for that documentation to get back, and then we're going to repeat the same process again, tracking those costs, supporting the costs. If we don't have any more issues, that's when it goes into the state grant management system. And it's going to go through another co-resident detail review, and then it's going to have a few more state reviews at TDM. And then the funds are going to start being transferred from the federal government through TDM and to you.
So those first few steps, if you remember what we mentioned earlier, we basically have to go through the process of recreating your project ledger because we've got to account for those costs in the state's systems, and then when we submit all of this up to FEMA at the end, we have to provide a very detailed listing of here were all the costs that comprise this project. So if you're already doing that, and being able to provide some of those summary documents on the front end that show, all right, here's everything that was included in this, it makes life so much easier on us to just enter those in. And we've got pretty good software for extracting some of that information in data formats where we don't have to manually key stuff in. So the better your detail in the front end, the better.
Now we're going to go over a few of the best practices. So kind of
I do want to take one step back because we've heard this on a number of occasions from some of the hike applicants we've worked with in the past, but I think there's a common misconception that the state has all the federal funds in their account and it's accruing interest, and so it's an incentive for the state to not make payments, and that's just, it's not the case. And Steve, you can probably get some real clarification there. There's a lot that goes into drawing down from, the state has to submit things up through their funds management division. They request funds from FEMA SmartLink, which is essentially a line of credit that's transferred down, works its way over to the comptroller somehow.
And we have to get it out of the comptroller system within a certain period before we pay for it.
Right, exactly. So we all love red tape, for sure, but it's not like the state's just got all this money in their account and they just refuse to pay.
So we kind of talked a little bit about budget by project account. For submitting your first RFR, definitely think of it as a trial run. I wouldn't wait on your first RFR to like pulling up a large payment request like over $100,000. It just gives us, it's kind of like information overload. If possible, like when you start getting $25,000, $30,000, go ahead and send it over to us. It lets us kind of digest the documents to expect, like kind of the format we expect to see, as well as all the policies. We can get that out of the way, and then hopefully the next time when a bigger payment request comes in, we kind of already know what we're to expect, and it'll really speed things up.
And maybe even limit it to just a few roads within a certain precinct. You know, $15,000 to $20,000 across 3 roads. That then we'll really start to understand how you operate, and then we try to implement as many efficiencies as possible. And you guys will start to see this. The primary reviewer that's receiving your documents, they're going to be the same person that reviews it every time. Because once you've learned how somebody's payroll is set up, and I mean, instead of having to go back through and redo all the things they've already done, it just makes life a lot easier to keep it with the same person.
Commissioner timesheets, I know it's an iffy topic, but for FEMA grant awards, we really do need the commissioner timesheets to be included on these projects. So you guys can put those together for us, and it'll definitely help us out.
And it'll help you out. I mean, otherwise, you know, in a lot of cases, we've worked with applicants that they're like, forget it, we just won't worry about, you know, the commissioner's cost in that, and, you know, overseeing some of this. And, you know, you guys you're doing the work. And if you can take just a few extra minutes, even if maybe there's a system in place for the commissioner, I got a feeling you've got some best practices that manage, you know, how you guys have done that.
Most of our commissioners are more doing the DAC, they're not out there working on roads so far this time, you know, 7 yes.
Yeah.
And I just included them in our daily worksheet.
But it's just a little bit of effort to get that in, and it ends up stacking up quite a bit. I know it's worthwhile down the road.
Okay, once again, I know we've hit on this a bunch of times. Tracking material purchases, any detail you can give us, county road, PW number, the amounts that are actually being used off the invoice. all of that information is going to greatly speed up the process. One thing that is really big for me is the way that document requests are responded to. So I might make a document request, say it has 10 items on it. So I send it out, and then we get back the document request with a bunch of documents attached, and I'm going through them, and maybe I can't match up everything, or I'm missing something, and it's hard for me to track from what was given to us back to the actual document request. I don't know if the document request was meant to have everything, if maybe we're still waiting on a few documents. So if possible, if you could send back all the documents with a copy of the request and just mark out items. If you need to, you can say, we just don't have this. If that's the case, we're going to try to find a way to work with you and see if maybe there's something else you can provide.
That's a better response than not responding at all, because then we're gonna continue asking you 7 different ways for the same thing. It's, you know, if you just say, you know what, we don't have it in this case, then at least we know what the path forward is gonna be.
Yeah, and all this information is just general documents that we see a lot, but there definitely could be other ways that we could work with you to substantiate all these payments and costs.
I'll add number 5 too. If you get a document request and there's a part of it that's confusing to you, let your recovery officer know, and we'll have a quick call. But I mean, you can resolve something in a 3-minute call that might take 6 hours worth of emails back and forth. And so if you're confused about something, please, we really prefer, I mean, I've been telling these guys from the start, as soon as you get your first reimbursement request from the applicant, kick off with a call just to get a good understanding of how they're set up. But the same goes for you guys. If you're confused about something, just let us know. But it shouldn't take long to get to the bottom.
I think it's been our experience too that once we do have a call with whoever's putting together your payment request, I think things have gone a lot smoother. I'm Jake, you can attest to that. But you know, we have, like we said, we have different people who are working with your county's documents in particular. And I'd love to set up a call with you if you haven't already to have them talk with you, because that way we're all on the same page, and it really does, I've seen it speed up this whole process.
So we don't have a submit in RFR. Generally, I'd say 20 to 50,000 is a good number for optimal speed. Obviously, if you need, don't hold on to a bunch of costs. If you have them, you can go ahead and send them over to us, and we're definitely going to get it processed. But if you're currently incurring costs at a relatively steady pace, I would say that sending them in regularly at about 20 to 50,000 would be a good suggestion.
And as you saw on that timeline earlier, that was an actual applicant that's actually had 9 reimbursement requests for a single project. And the reason they've been able to have 9 is because they did break it up into digestible chunks. Otherwise, it does start to get overwhelming, both for whoever's putting the submission together and whoever's reviewing it. Just creates some real challenges there, and and it slows down cash flow. We want to be able to reimburse some of these costs down. I know in some cases it's a couple of years after the fact, and you still haven't been reimbursed for some costs. But to the greatest extent possible, we do want to keep the cash flow.
So number 7, entity-wide rates. If they do make sense for your entity, it definitely speeds things up. It's pretty straightforward for us, and we can then compare the rates for all the employees. They're all the same. So for small purchases, once again, it's policy for at least 3 bids. This includes all material purchases. If you couldn't get 3 bids, then a memo will help out. If you need help, trying to track down that documentation, I know some counties in the past have given us commissioner court minutes, which has helped us track and make sure, okay, they reached out to all these different vendors, they did their due diligence. That kind of information goes a long way. Calculating material costs. So we know a lot of people might just get material from TxDOT or whatever, it's dumped on the side of the road, but it's kind of like a raw material. It needs to be either ground up or processed in some way. And so if you can provide us with a sheet that basically runs down everything that you did by cost line to come out with a final product, then that's super helpful. I know we've seen it in the past, we'll have millings that get ground up by a dozer that has this FEMA cost code and an operator who operates at $20 an hour or whatever, and you add it all up, divide it out by the total number of cubic yards, and then we can easily see how you made that rate, and then make sure it's reasonable, follows all of our cost principles, and then we can okay it. Another one, when multiple invoices are paid in one check, check details are super important. So, for example, so here we have a check for $32,000. So let's say we have an invoice for $16,000 that we can see is coming out of this check, but that's all we see. We're like, okay, well, it doesn't match. How do we know for sure that it's related to this check? That's where these check details are going to come in. You can see here it shows each vendor invoice that went into the check and totals it. Then we can match back all those invoices to the check and be sure, like, okay, yeah, all these amounts match up.
And if you don't have check detail like this, a handwritten memo
Yeah.
that says explains it, it's just as good.
Just a handwritten note showing the invoices and how much was paid off is will suffice. Lastly, basically just our tracking costs rehashed one more time, showing that all your labor, equipment, material, contract, and direct administrative costs all together can equal up to the total requested amount. Now,
All right, before we move to this, I know several folks have mentioned some things that you guys are doing to cut down on the amount of time and really be as effective as possible with tracking. You mentioned something about the calendar and the way some of your supervisors and commissioners keep track of certain things. You want to tell us about?
Our commissioners, 2 of them came from Texas, and they had a yearly calendar, and on their calendar every day they write down what their employees do, what equipment they use, what road they're on, how many materials they're on, and I think 3 of the 4 write down the weather. And so when 4223 happened, 2 weeks later, actually nearly a month later, we get a presidential declaration. They could go back to May 4th and do a daily worksheet and know what road they were on, what material they put out, everything. And they still keep that calendar. They now turn in a daily worksheet to me, but they keep that calendar. And we have questions on the worksheets. We can go back at their calendar and find any issues or mistakes that they've made, we've made, whatever. We have so many numbers going through our heads that you know how it is. You transpose numbers and have we messed up? We can go back and look and it's there.
I gotta give this thing. She has probably been responsible for submitting more requests than anyone we've worked with. And since she took over, I mean, only every 1 in 5 we actually have to do a document request. And I think you're just trying to keep us on our toes.
Against the commissioner's will, we got them on iPads and we did a real basic worksheet that they did want more to work on. They put every day what their name's name is, what hours, what equipment they're on. That way when I go in to the center finish the road, I just pull up that road and give them the day to day. That way I can see, somebody got off the roller onto a water truck. It doesn't add up. I can go back and look at that complete worksheet and see if they send a roller over to the road or other hours, stuff like that. Like I say, we do it through Dropbox, so they do it every day. So when they finish a road, I just kind of load their place and then just search for just that road. But like I say, I really enjoy the input of what most people are doing with it, because it makes sense to go through. Like I say, it's the documents. I was so confused as to how, what documents I had pulled together, which ones I had to wait for checks, and they don't cash. So I just did a summary system, put the files together, and the last thing before I send it is I put it all in that file number order, find it in a binder with Acrobat, and put it all in them. I'm like, all the files. That way it goes in the same order every time.
It's been fantastic. And like I said, when your reimbursement requests are being made days in a lot of cases.
more precincts and so many county roads. I just do about this county road, they finish the county road.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And that allows us to, when we're doing a final review for a project, go back and do just kind of a sniff test as to, all right, here's how much FEMA estimated for materials, labor, equipment cost. How does that correspond to what actually the end result was? And it's.
I'm surprised I was at the stage because I was involved in the cubic yard, told with the thing before you when my boss who did this before me, they came up with that.
Right.
I was real surprised that when they come in with that amount of material and that.
It does. I mean, it really gives us confidence that the road was constructed appropriately, because when you've got the right amount of material, you've got the right amount of paving. Those cost estimating meetings are fairly accurate as long as the assumptions are
I've already
accurate.
seen that our procurement policy is, county county is pretty small, it's not very populated, so it's kind of what we've always used this county. This is how we've always done it, so, I do obviously need to go back and make sure that we did call for pricing for different places, but I don't know if that's documented, so I'll have to go back and get that information. And lately, we just had, both because our main supplier just changed the price, we don't have a contract price, but it's been really consistent, so now I've got to go back and find out why are you getting lower, so I don't care.
Why are you lowering the
But why is it different all of a sudden, so that's what I'm saying, that's real helpful to know.
Well, for those of you guys who haven't started submitting large project reimbursements yet, really want to encourage you to exercise that best practice of going to a trial run with a smaller one. We'll get the finance reviewer that's going to be working with your grants moving forward on a call with your recovery officer. Everybody get on the same page about how everything's calculated, how you're structured, because everybody's different. Everybody's got different benefit systems, payroll's done differently, the benefits are done. So it's great to get some of that clear when you start. And we'll have some more time for question and answer later, but I wanted to take just a couple of minutes. So I know that local financial resources are important, and the FEMA side of things is covering for the most part 75% of your disaster recovery to restore those roads, and 75% of the cost. But sometimes, when you've got 70 roads across your county that are completely devastated and millions of dollars, meeting the 25% requirement is a real challenge. And so what we wanted to do is give you guys a little bit of an idea of some of the resources that are out there and that are actually moving forward right now. And we'll if you're interested in this, I'd love to sit with you afterward to give you a little bit more. But the general land office right now is probably going to be your best bet for trying to find match funding that's not a local contribution. And so basically the general land office, you can't see this, we've got handouts somewhere. Do we bring those in? We're going to pass them out. Basically, the deputy director from the general land office, he wanted to be here. He had another commitment out of Southeast Texas, but gave us some handouts to give you guys that will kind of point you in the right direction as to how to apply for some of this additional funding. So the GLO was actually the state went lobbied with the federal government and legislature to try to get additional funding. Basically, they said, hey, here's how much it looks like we're going to get from FEMA for housing, for public works projects. Here's everything that we received, and we still have a huge unmet need. And so what basically the legislature did was they did a congressional appropriation for the 2015 funds, and essentially, I forget what the amount that went directly to GLO was. It's not very clear here. Do you remember what it was? 45 million? Something like that? Basically, they received two different pots of money. In total, I think it's about $150 million to cover the 2015 and 2016 disasters. And they essentially, these are HUD community development block grant program funds.